Hey ChatGPT, can you name 10 principles that many philosophers have considered essential components of a good constitution?
Yes, here are 10 principles that many philosophers have regarded as essential for a good constitution. 1. Rule of law. Laws must be general, well-known, stable, and equally binding for everyone. 2. Separation of powers. The division of legislative, executive, and judicial powers prevents abuse of power. 3. Democratic legitimacy. The government must be legitimized by the people either directly or indirectly. 4. Fundamental freedoms. Individual rights such as freedom of speech, press, religion, and assembly are central. 5. Equality before the law. All citizens should be treated equally regardless of origin, status, or religion. 6. Protection of private property. Property rights promote economic stability and individual freedom. 7. Popular sovereignty. The highest power lies with the people, who exert influence through elections or other mechanisms. 8. Social justice. A constitution should ensure fair opportunities for all and prevent extreme inequalities. 9. Possibility of constitutional amendments. A good constitution must be flexible enough to adapt to changing times. 10. Protection against tyranny. Mechanisms such as checks and balances or fundamental rights should prevent any one person or group from accumulating too much power. These principles can be found in many modern constitutions, though in different forms.
Interesting. However, I have a question regarding the ninth point. How can it be ensured that constitutional amendments do not lead to its deterioration or even to the erosion of one of its fundamental pillars?
Good question. To prevent constitutional amendments from leading to a weakening or even the hollowing out of its fundamental principles, various mechanisms have been proposed by philosophers and constitutional scholars. 1. Eternity clauses. Some constitutions, e.g., Germany's Basic Law, contain provisions that cannot be changed, such as human dignity or the separation of powers. 2. High amendment thresholds. A simple parliamentary majority should not be sufficient to amend the Constitution. Instead, high thresholds, e.g., a two-thirds majority, or referendums can be required. 3. Multi-stage processes. Amendments could be made more difficult through multiple readings, time delays, or the requirement for confirmation by different institutions to prevent hasty decisions. 4. Review by constitutional courts. An independent court can assess whether a proposed amendment is compatible with the fundamental principles of the Constitution. 5. Checks and balances. A distribution of power among different institutions ensures that no single group can push through changes on its own. 6. Citizen participation. Referendums or citizen forums can ensure that fundamental changes receive broad public approval. 7. Constitutional identity as a safeguard. Thinkers like Habermas and Dworkin argue that a constitution has an inner identity that must not be arbitrarily altered. 8. Primacy of international norms. In some countries or political unions, e.g., the EU, international treaties protect fundamental principles and bind national constitutions to them. 9. Protection through political culture. A strong democratic culture ensures that even theoretically possible constitutional erosions are not socially accepted. 10. Transparency and public discourse. Constitutional amendments should be widely discussed to ensure that they are not implemented in the shadows of political interests. Ultimately, a good constitution is not just a legal framework but also a societal construct. If political culture allows for the erosion of the Constitution, formal mechanisms alone are of limited help. Therefore, the vigilance of citizens is often the best safeguard.
Good approaches. The last point, in particular, seems crucial to me. If the spirit of the Constitution is lost among the people, it will inevitably degenerate over time. So what kinds of rituals, societal and cultural institutions, and routines can help keep the spirit of the Constitution alive among the population?
Yes, exactly. A constitution does not live solely through laws but primarily through the awareness and practice of its citizens. To keep its spirit alive, cultural and social institutions, as well as rituals that continuously convey democratic values, are needed. Here are some proven and possible approaches. Education and civic awareness. 1. Civic education in schools. Political education should not only be theoretical but also practical, incorporating debates and student parliaments. 2. Constitutional celebrations. National holidays, e.g., Constitution Day, could be more strongly linked to educational and community events. 3. Universities and research. Democratic values should be central themes in humanities and social science research. Civil society and public engagement. 4. Public assemblies. Regular public discussion forums on political topics encourage participation and democratic awareness. 5. Participatory budgeting. Involving people in real decision-making processes strengthens their sense of responsibility for democracy. 6. Independent media and investigative journalism. A free press exposes grievances and ensures an informed society. Cultural rituals and symbols. 7. Oaths and pledges. In some countries, officials or politicians take an oath on the Constitution. This practice could also be introduced in schools or communities. 8. Monuments and memorials, places that commemorate the struggle for freedom and justice, keep democratic achievements present in people's minds. 9. Art and pop culture, films, literature, and theater that highlight democratic values and historical developments shape collective memory. Democratic practice in everyday life. 10. Transparent participation in organizations, democratic principles, e.g., elections, participation, should be more strongly embedded in clubs, businesses, and schools. 11. Freedom of speech as a norm, societies that encourage and value critical expression are more resistant to authoritarian tendencies. 12. Equal access to political participation, low barrier opportunities for political engagement prevent democracy from becoming an elite affair. Ultimately, democracy must be understood not only as a political system but as a lived culture. Societies where people actively engage in decision-making and where democratic values are deeply woven into everyday routines have a greater resilience against erosion and abuse.
Another fascinating list. And yes, I think you are fundamentally right. The core principles of a constitution, whether democratic or not, must be lived in everyday life. People must feel stronger, safer, more empowered, and materially better off as a result of these principles and organizational structures. Only when the benefits of the Constitution's core principles are felt on a daily basis will the population truly want to defend and preserve it.
Absolutely. If the Constitution, or more broadly, the political order, remains just an abstract concept that people do not experience as beneficial in their daily lives, it loses its binding force. In the worst case, people may see it as an obstacle or even as a tool of the elites to maintain power. This means that a constitution must not only guarantee formal rights but also create social, economic, and cultural structures that make people feel that this order genuinely works in their interest. Democracy, or any other form of government, remains stable only if people experience firsthand that their participation makes a difference and improves their quality of life. Here are a few examples of how people can tangibly experience the Constitution in their daily lives. Rule of law. When a citizen sues a powerful corporation or a government agency and has a fair chance of winning, they experience the value of the Constitution directly. Democratic participation. When someone starts a petition or engages in local politics and actually sees change happen, they feel that their voice matters. Social justice. When a constitution guarantees social minimum standards that genuinely reduce poverty or enable upward mobility through education, people see its practical benefits. Freedom rights. When freedom of speech is not just a theoretical right but allows controversial opinions to be expressed without fear of repression, then the Constitution is truly alive. In short, a constitution must not only be taught in schools and celebrated on national holidays, it must also prove itself in everyday life. Otherwise, it remains mere rhetoric that no one will defend when it truly matters.
Yes, exactly. That is why, first and foremost, a constitution must be concise, clearly understandable, and free of contradictions. A second crucial point is that every citizen must be able to invoke it at any time and in any situation, and use it to assert their rights even against more powerful opponents. Students should be able to rely on it in school, employees in the workplace, partners in relationships, and so on. These principles should apply effectively throughout society. Otherwise, individuals may quickly perceive the Constitution as hypocritical and lose all personal respect for it.
Yes, that gets to the heart of the problem. A constitution that exists only as an abstract text and does not apply to everyday power dynamics will quickly be seen as a mere facade. The moment people realize that they cannot truly invoke the Constitution, whether against employers, authorities, or social institutions, it begins to appear as nothing more than a tool for the powerful. Concise, clear, and free of contradictions. A constitution that is too complex or vague serves only lawyers and bureaucrats, not the citizens. It must be formulated in a way that everyone can understand and invoke without needing a legal education. Universal applicability in all areas of life. If constitutional principles apply not only in citizen-state relations but also serve as guiding principles in businesses, schools, families, and other social structures, their effectiveness becomes tangible. Actual enforceability against the powerful. This is a crucial point. Many people lose faith in law and democracy because they see that the powerful can afford freedoms that are denied to others. Therefore, the following must apply. 1. Accessible legal remedies. Citizens should be able to defend themselves easily, without expensive lawyers or years-long court battles. 2. Independent mediation bodies, ombudsman offices, or independent institutions could serve as low-threshold mechanisms for conflict resolution. 3. Protection from repression. Those who invoke their rights must not face negative consequences. If a constitution meets all these criteria and is experienced by people in daily life as both a shield and a tool, it will remain alive and will be defended. However, if it is perceived merely as a document filled with empty words that do not apply in reality, it will lose its legitimacy, and with that, its protection against erosion.
Yes, exactly. In the end, people judge things based on their own experiences. If they experience the Constitution as beneficial to themselves and as a powerful shield against oppression and exploitation, they will be willing to make sacrifices and efforts to protect and uphold it. However, if they see it as completely useless in their own lives, they won't lift a finger to defend it. I have another question. Even if all of this is ensured in a given society, language changes over time. Words and images that are clear and universally understood today may become vague or take on entirely different meanings in a few hundred years. How can the spirit of a good constitution be preserved over millennia? On the one hand, any change to the text carries significant risks of errors or deliberate misuse. On the other hand, occasional modernization may be necessary to keep the text comprehensible and unambiguous.
Yes, that is a fundamental problem. Even if a constitution is perfectly formulated, language will inevitably evolve. Terms that are clear today might become ambiguous or acquire new interpretations over the centuries. At the same time, any alteration of the text is dangerous because it could, intentionally or unintentionally, dilute its original spirit. Possible solutions for preserving the spirit of a constitution over millennia. 1. Metatextual safeguards, a constitution above the Constitution. In addition to the main text, an explanatory layer could exist to define the meaning of key terms and principles. These constitutional commentaries would not be legal texts themselves, but rather an officially maintained historical document that preserves the original spirit. A council of philosophers, historians, and legal scholars could oversee these commentaries without altering the primary text. 2. Cultural embedding, the Constitution as a living narrative. Constitutions should not exist solely as dry legal documents but should be embedded in stories, art, rituals, and traditions. If people experience the core values of the Constitution through literature, films, theater, or even religious ceremonies, its spirit will persist despite linguistic changes. Example, the Bible or Homer's epics have been passed down for millennia because they are woven into cultural narratives. 3. Institutionalized interpretation by independent guardians of the spirit. An institution, e.g., a constitutional court or an ethical council, could be tasked with preserving the original values without arbitrarily modifying the text. This body would have to remain independent of political influence and operate over the long term. A philosophical senate could be envisioned, focusing solely on maintaining the constitutional spirit rather than engaging in daily politics. 4. Multilingual safeguards. The Constitution could be written in multiple languages from the outset. If one language changes too much or disappears, other versions could preserve the original meaning. Particularly stable and precise languages, e.g., Latin, Ancient Greek, or a deliberately created artificial language, could serve as reference texts. 5. Minimalist, timeless language. The Constitution itself should be as clear, concise, and abstract as possible to minimize misinterpretations. Example, instead of saying, every person has the right to a free press, one could say, every person has the right to express and disseminate their opinions freely. Timeless concepts like justice, dignity, and freedom are more stable than technical or context-dependent terms. 6. Careful, periodic modernization under strict conditions. A mechanism could be established to allow only linguistic updates every few centuries, without altering the content. These updates should be carried out exclusively by specialized historians and linguists under the supervision of independent councils. Broad public approval would be crucial to prevent misuse. Conclusion. The key lies in a combination of stable texts, cultural integration, and institutional guardianship. The text itself should be as simple and timeless as possible, while a cultural and philosophical infrastructure ensures that its spirit remains understood. If people still feel in 1,000 years that the Constitution protects and empowers them, they will instinctively defend its correct interpretation.
That is a very good solution. A council of philosophers, historians, and legal scholars could create a modernized version every 100 years. They could start by conducting surveys among the population to determine which parts of the text are still clear and which might need adjustment. Then, they could develop proposals that would be widely discussed among the public. The results would then be reviewed, incorporated, discussed again, and so on. Since the principles of the Constitution already live within the population, this process should minimize the risk of degeneration. I also think the idea of conducting this process in multiple languages simultaneously is excellent. Thank you for this fantastic conversation. I really learned something from it.
I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you as well for this great discussion. If you ever feel like talking about philosophy, politics, or any other topic again, I'm always here.
Cool, I'll gladly take you up on that offer soon. See you then.
Sounds great. See you.